Natasha Richardson stared at the elegant cream-colored envelope that had arrived by courier to her modest apartment. Her hands shook slightly as she recognized the expensive letterhead, the same company logo that once belonged to her and her ex-husband. The invitation inside was written in gold lettering, requesting her presence at the annual charity gala hosted by Benjamin Richardson and his new wife, Brittany. The words on the invitation felt like daggers. "We cordially invite you to join us for an evening of celebration and giving back to the community. Black tie required. Please RSVP by Friday." What made her stomach twist wasn't just the formal language. It was the handwritten note at the bottom in Benjamin's familiar scrawl. "Natasha, I thought you might enjoy seeing how far we've come. It would be wonderful to catch up on old times. I'm sure you'll find the evening enlightening. Benjamin." She knew that tone. It was the same condescending voice he used when he wanted to make her feel small. The same voice he used 3 years ago when he told her she would never amount to anything without him. The same voice that echoed in her mind during those dark months when she had nothing but $27 in her bank account and a suitcase full of clothes. Natasha set the invitation down on her kitchen table and walked to the window of her simple one-bedroom apartment. To anyone looking at her life now, it would seem like Benjamin was right. She lived modestly, drove a regular car, and dressed simply. But what Benjamin didn't know, what nobody in their old social circle knew, was that the woman he had thrown away like garbage now controlled an empire worth over $200 million. She picked up her phone and dialed her assistant. "Patricia, I need you to clear my schedule for Saturday night." "The Henderson Industries Gala? But ma'am, you own Henderson Industries. Shouldn't you be hosting?" Natasha smiled coldly. "Actually, I think I'll attend as a guest this time." "And Patricia? Make sure Benjamin Richardson's contracts with all our subsidiary companies are ready for review Monday morning." "All of them, ma'am?" "Every single one." She hung up and looked at the invitation again. Benjamin had no idea that Sterling Enterprises, the anonymous holding company that owned 40% of his business contracts, belonged to the woman he had humiliated and discarded. He had no idea that the quiet charity donations keeping his favorite causes funded came from her accounts. He had no idea that the woman he thought was struggling to make ends meet could buy and sell his entire company 10 times over. The invitation was meant to be a knife in her back. Benjamin wanted to parade his new wealth and success in front of her, to show her what she had lost when he chose his young secretary over his wife of 8 years. He wanted to see her broken, desperate, and grateful for any crumbs of attention he might throw her way. What he was going to get instead was something far different. Natasha remembered the last time she saw Benjamin. It was in their divorce lawyer's office, where he sat smugly next to Brittany, his hand possessively placed on her growing belly. He had looked at Natasha with such disdain, as if she was something he had scraped off his shoe. "You'll never survive without me," he had said as they signed the papers that gave him everything: their house, their cars, their business, even her jewelry. "You don't have what it takes to make it in the real world." Brittany had giggled softly, her young face bright with victory. She was only 23 then, fresh out of college and completely infatuated with Benjamin's money and status. She looked at Natasha like she was an old relic being replaced by something newer and better. The lawyer had pushed the final papers across the table. Benjamin got everything because technically the business was in his name. Natasha had been too trusting, too naive to protect herself legally. She walked out of that office with nothing but her clothes and a broken heart. But she also walked out with something Benjamin never recognized in her: a fire that couldn't be extinguished. Now, 3 years later, she was looking at an invitation to her own triumph. Benjamin thought he was inviting a victim to witness his success. Instead, he was inviting the puppet master who controlled his strings. Natasha poured herself a glass of wine and began planning her return to high society. She would need the perfect dress, the perfect entrance, and the perfect moment to reveal the truth. She wanted to savor every second of Benjamin's realization that he had thrown away the best thing that ever happened to him. She thought about all the nights she had cried herself to sleep, all the days she had worked multiple jobs just to afford food, all the time she had doubted herself and wondered if Benjamin was right about her worthlessness. Those days were over. Saturday night would be her declaration of war, and Benjamin had no idea what was coming for him. The memory hit Natasha like a physical blow every time she allowed herself to remember that day. She had come home early from visiting her sick mother, excited to surprise Benjamin with his favorite dinner. The house was quiet when she entered, but she could hear voices upstairs in their bedroom. She had climbed the stairs slowly, thinking Benjamin might be on a business call. But as she got closer, she realized there were 2 voices, one male, one female. And they weren't talking about business. The door to their bedroom was slightly open. Through the crack, she could see Benjamin and Brittany, his secretary, in their marriage bed. The bed where she and Benjamin had made love, where they had planned their future, where she had dreamed of the children they might have someday. Brittany was young and beautiful, with blonde hair that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. She was everything Natasha wasn't: young, carefree, and completely devoted to Benjamin's every word. As Natasha watched in horror, she heard Brittany whisper, "When are you going to leave her?" "I'm tired of hiding." Benjamin's response destroyed what was left of Natasha's world. "Soon, baby. I'm just waiting for the right moment. Once I figure out how to keep the business and the house, she'll be gone. She doesn't contribute anything anyway. You're the one who makes me happy." Natasha had backed away from the door silently, her heart pounding so loud she was sure they would hear it. She grabbed her purse and keys and left the house, driving aimlessly around the city for hours, trying to process what she had seen and heard. When she finally returned home that evening, Benjamin was in his study, acting completely normal. He kissed her on the cheek and asked about her mother's health. He sat across from her at dinner and talked about his day at the office, never mentioning that his secretary had spent the afternoon in their bed. For 3 weeks, Natasha lived in this horrible limbo. She knew the truth, but she couldn't bring herself to confront it. She kept hoping it was a nightmare, that she had imagined everything. She watched Benjamin and Brittany at company events, noting the way they looked at each other, the way Brittany's hand would linger on his arm when she handed him documents. The end came on a Tuesday morning. Natasha was making breakfast when Benjamin sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a serious expression. "Natasha, we need to talk." She had known this moment was coming, but hearing the words still felt like a punch to the stomach. She turned off the stove and sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. "I want a divorce," he said simply. "This marriage isn't working anymore. We've grown apart, and I think it's best if we go our separate ways." "Is there someone else?" she asked quietly, even though she already knew the answer. Benjamin looked uncomfortable for a moment, then shrugged. "That's not really relevant. What matters is that we're done." The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Benjamin had expensive lawyers who found ways to prove that everything they had built together legally belonged to him. The business was in his name. The house was in his name. Even the car she drove every day was registered to him. Natasha's lawyer, who she could barely afford, tried his best, but Benjamin's team was too good. They painted her as a woman who had contributed nothing to their success, who had been content to live off her husband's hard work while contributing nothing herself. It wasn't true. Natasha had worked just as hard as Benjamin to build their marketing company. She had handled the creative side while he managed the business side. Her ideas and designs had won them their biggest clients. But none of that mattered in the legal proceedings because she had been too trusting to demand her name on the paperwork. The final blow came when Brittany showed up to the last court session, obviously pregnant. She sat behind Benjamin like a prize he had won, her hand resting on her belly, smiling at Natasha with false sympathy. After the judge signed the final papers, Benjamin approached Natasha in the courthouse hallway. "I want you to know this wasn't personal," he said. "You're a good person, Natasha. You'll find someone who appreciates you. Someone more suited to your level." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. He was telling her that she wasn't good enough for the life they had built together, that she belonged with someone simpler, someone with lower expectations. That night, Natasha sat in a cheap motel room with her suitcase and $27 in cash. She had no family except her elderly mother, no friends who weren't also friends with Benjamin, and no job experience outside of the company she could no longer be part of. She could have given up. She could have let Benjamin's words become her reality. Instead, she made a promise to herself that night. She would not just survive, she would thrive. And someday Benjamin would regret every cruel word he had spoken to her. She just never imagined that someday would come so soon. The first month after the divorce was the hardest of Natasha's life. She found a tiny studio apartment in a rough neighborhood, the only place she could afford with her limited savings. The walls were thin, the plumbing barely worked, and she could hear her neighbors arguing at all hours of the night. She took any job she could find. In the mornings, she worked at a coffee shop, making lattes for business people who rushed past her without making eye contact. In the afternoons, she cleaned office buildings, scrubbing toilets and emptying trash cans. At night, she worked at a call center, dealing with angry customers who yelled at her through the phone. Every dollar mattered. She ate ramen noodles and generic cereal for weeks. She walked everywhere to save bus fare. She bought her clothes from thrift stores and learned to repair everything herself because she couldn't afford to replace anything. But the hardest part wasn't the poverty. It was the loneliness and the constant voice in her head that sounded like Benjamin, telling her she wasn't good enough, that she would never amount to anything, that she was destined to struggle forever. 3 months into her new life, something changed. She was cleaning the offices of a small investment firm late one night when she overheard a phone conversation between two partners. They were discussing a client who was about to lose a fortune because he didn't understand the market trends. Natasha had always been good with numbers and patterns. In college, she had studied business and finance before switching to marketing. As she listened to the conversation, she realized she could see the solution they were missing. The next morning, she did something that terrified her. She called the investment firm and asked to speak to one of the partners. When he came on the line, she introduced herself as the cleaning woman and asked if she could share an idea about their client's portfolio. The partner, Robert Chen, was initially annoyed. But something in Natasha's voice made him listen. She explained her analysis of the market trends and suggested a strategy that could save their client's investment. Robert was skeptical, but he was also desperate. His client was threatening to pull all his money if they couldn't turn things around. So he decided to try Natasha's suggestion. 2 weeks later, the client's portfolio had gained back everything he had lost and more. Robert called Natasha and asked her to come in for a meeting. "I don't understand," he said, sitting across from her in his expensive office. "You're a cleaning woman with no formal training in investment strategy. How did you see what my team of experts missed?" Natasha looked around the office, taking in the diplomas on the walls, the expensive furniture, the view of the city skyline. "Maybe because I don't think like an expert," she said. "I think like someone who can't afford to lose." Robert offered her a job as a junior analyst. The pay was barely more than what she made at her 3 other jobs combined, but it was a start. She quit the coffee shop and the call center but kept cleaning offices at night to make ends meet. For 6 months, she worked 18-hour days, learning everything she could about finance and investment. She read every book she could get from the library. She studied market reports until her eyes burned. She asked questions that made her colleagues laugh, but she didn't care. And slowly she started to excel. Her instincts about market trends were almost supernatural. She could spot opportunities and risks that others missed. Within a year, she was handling major accounts and making more money than she had ever imagined possible. But Natasha wasn't satisfied with just being successful at someone else's company. She started saving every penny she could, building towards something bigger. She began making small investments of her own, turning hundreds into thousands, then thousands into tens of thousands. 2 years after starting at the investment firm, she had saved enough to start her own company. She called it Sterling Enterprises, choosing a name that sounded established and trustworthy but revealed nothing about who she was. She started small, buying struggling businesses and turning them around. She had a gift for seeing potential where others saw failure. Within 6 months, Sterling Enterprises owned 5 small companies. Within a year it was 15. Natasha was careful to keep her identity secret. All business was conducted through lawyers and representatives. She never appeared at board meetings or public events. To the business world, Sterling Enterprises was owned by a mysterious figure who preferred to stay out of the spotlight. This anonymity served her well. It allowed her to move freely through the business world without anyone connecting her to Benjamin Richardson's ex-wife. It also meant she could keep an eye on Benjamin without him knowing. As Sterling Enterprises grew, Natasha made sure to acquire companies that did business with Benjamin's firm. She became one of his biggest clients without him ever knowing who was signing his paychecks. She watched from the shadows as Benjamin and Brittany enjoyed their success. She saw the newspaper articles about their charity work, their expensive vacations, their beautiful new house. She knew about Brittany's shopping habits, Benjamin's golf tournaments, and their plans to expand the business. What they didn't know was that 40% of their revenue came from contracts with companies owned by the woman Benjamin had discarded. They were building their empire on the foundation of Natasha's success, and they had no idea. As she prepared to attend Benjamin's gala, Natasha reflected on how far she had come. 3 years ago, she had been broken and defeated. Now she controlled more wealth than Benjamin could imagine. The scared, helpless woman who had left that courthouse with nothing had transformed into a business mogul who could buy and sell Benjamin's entire world. The transformation was complete. Now it was time for the revelation. Natasha's corner office on the 42nd floor of the Sterling building offered a panoramic view of the city. From her floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the entire business district, including the modest 15-story building where Benjamin Richardson's marketing firm occupied 3 floors. She often stood at this window in the early morning, drinking her coffee and watching the tiny figures hurrying to work below. Sometimes she wondered if Benjamin ever looked up at the Sterling building and wondered who owned it. The building bore no external signs indicating Sterling Enterprises headquarters. To most people it was just another anonymous corporate tower. But inside these walls, Natasha commanded an empire that touched nearly every aspect of the business world. Sterling Enterprises now owned 47 companies across 12 different industries. They ranged from small tech startups to established manufacturing firms, from boutique consulting agencies to major retail chains. The beauty of her business model was its invisibility. Each company operated independently, maintaining its original name and management structure. The only thing that changed was ownership, and that information was buried in legal documents that few people bothered to examine. "Ma'am, your 9 o'clock is here," Patricia announced through the intercom. Patricia Collins was Natasha's executive assistant, a sharp woman in her 50s who had joined Sterling Enterprises in its early days and now helped manage the complex web of companies and investments. "Send him in," Natasha replied, settling behind her mahogany desk. The man who entered was Thomas Williams, the CEO of Henderson Industries, one of Sterling's largest subsidiary companies. Henderson Industries happened to be Benjamin Richardson's biggest client, providing marketing services for Henderson's chain of luxury hotels. "Natasha, thank you for seeing me," Thomas said, taking a seat across from her desk. He was one of the few people who knew Sterling's true owner, and their relationship had evolved from purely business to something approaching friendship. "What's on your mind, Thomas?" "It's about the Richardson Group contract. I've been reviewing their work for our spring campaign and frankly I'm not impressed. Their creative team seems to have lost their edge. The campaign they proposed is generic and uninspiring." Natasha leaned back in her chair, considering this information. "What do you recommend?" "I think it's time to consider other options. There are several agencies that could do better work for the same price. Richardson Group has been coasting on their reputation for too long." "That's interesting," Natasha said carefully. "I understand Richardson Group was once known for innovative campaigns. What changed?" Thomas shrugged. "Hard to say. Maybe success made them lazy. Or maybe they never had the creative spark people thought they did. Their best work was actually from several years ago, back when they had a different creative director. I believe it was the owner's wife who handled that side of the business." Natasha's smile was cold. "His ex-wife, you mean?" "Yes, that's right. I heard she left the company during the divorce. Shame really. Her campaigns were brilliant. The work they've produced since then has been mediocre at best." "I see. Well, Thomas, I trust your judgment. If you think it's time to explore other options, then that's what we should do. But let's not rush into anything. Take your time to research alternatives." After Thomas left, Natasha returned to her window. She could see people streaming into the Richardson Group building for their morning meetings. Somewhere in there, Benjamin was probably reviewing quarterly reports, completely unaware that his biggest client was considering dropping him. The irony was delicious. Benjamin had thrown away his most valuable asset when he divorced her. Natasha had been the creative force behind their most successful campaigns, the one who understood client needs and delivered results. Benjamin had been the face of the company, the one who schmoozed with clients and closed deals, but the real talent had been hers. Now he was struggling to maintain that success without her, and his biggest client, a client he didn't know was ultimately controlled by his ex-wife, was losing confidence in his abilities. Natasha's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. "Yes, Patricia? I have the RSVPs for Mr. Richardson's gala. It looks like it's going to be quite the event. The guest list includes some of the biggest names in business and politics." "Anyone we know?" "Actually, yes. At least a dozen CEOs from companies we either own or do significant business with, including Thomas Williams from Henderson Industries." Natasha smiled. "Perfect. What about my dress for the evening?" "The designer will be here at 3 for the final fitting. The jewelry is ready for pickup, and the car will be available whenever you need it." "Excellent. Oh, and Patricia? I want you to prepare a comprehensive report on all of Sterling's business relationships with the Richardson Group. Include every subsidiary company, every contract, and every payment made over the past 2 years. All of it. Every single detail. I want to know exactly how much of Benjamin's success depends on our money." After hanging up, Natasha opened her laptop and pulled up the financial reports for Richardson Group. The numbers told a story that Benjamin probably didn't fully understand. Over the past 2 years, 43% of his revenue had come from companies owned by Sterling Enterprises. Without those contracts, his business would be struggling to stay afloat. She thought about the note Benjamin had written on the gala invitation. I thought you might enjoy seeing how far we've come." The arrogance of that statement amazed her. He wanted to show off his success to the woman he believed was still struggling to make ends meet. He wanted to rub her face in everything she had lost when he chose Brittany over her. What he didn't realize was that his success was built on her foundation. She was the puppet master and he was dancing to her tune without even knowing it. Natasha pulled up another file on her computer, a detailed dossier on Benjamin and Brittany's life. She knew about their mortgage payments, their car loans, their credit card bills. She knew that despite their flashy lifestyle, they were actually highly leveraged and dependent on the continued success of the business. She knew that Brittany spent more on clothes and jewelry each month than most people made in a year. She knew that Benjamin had started drinking more heavily since the divorce, probably struggling with stress he didn't fully understand. She knew that their marriage wasn't as happy as it appeared in the society pages. Knowledge was power, and Natasha had more knowledge about Benjamin's life than he could imagine. She had been watching, waiting, and planning for the perfect moment to reveal herself. That moment was finally here. The designer boutique on Fifth Avenue was the kind of place Natasha never could have afforded 3 years ago. Now, she owned the building it was housed in, though the boutique's owner had no idea her anonymous landlord was standing in the dressing room trying on gowns. "This one is absolutely stunning," Marianne, the head designer, said as she adjusted the flowing midnight blue gown. "The cut is perfect for your figure, and the color brings out your skin tone beautifully." Natasha studied herself in the three-way mirror. The gown was elegant without being flashy, expensive without being obvious. It made her look sophisticated and successful, but not in a way that would immediately announce her wealth. She wanted Benjamin to see her and think she looked good, but not so good that he would immediately suspect she was doing better than he thought. "It's perfect," she decided. "I'll take it." "Excellent choice. Now let's talk about accessories." 2 hours later, Natasha left the boutique with everything she needed for the gala. The dress, the shoes, the jewelry, all carefully chosen to send the right message. She wanted to look like a woman who had rebuilt her life successfully, but not so successfully that it would threaten Benjamin's narrative about her supposed inferiority. Her next stop was the salon, where her stylist Marcus, not the Marcus on her forbidden list, but Marcus Thompson, worked his magic on her hair and makeup. He had been styling her for the past year, ever since Sterling Enterprises became successful enough for her to afford such luxuries. "You seem different today," Marcus observed as he worked on her hair. "More focused. Like you're preparing for something important." "You could say that," Natasha replied, watching him in the mirror. "Tonight is going to be a very special evening." "Hot date?" Natasha laughed. "Not exactly. More like a business meeting disguised as a social event." Marcus raised an eyebrow but didn't push for details. He had learned that his wealthy clients often spoke in code about their affairs. While Marcus worked, Natasha's phone buzzed with messages from Patricia. The final details for tonight were falling into place. The car would pick her up at 7. Her security team would be stationed discreetly around the gala venue. The financial reports she had requested were ready for her review. Most importantly, Patricia had confirmed that Thomas Williams and several other Sterling-affiliated CEOs would be at the gala. When the moment came for her revelation, she would have witnesses who could verify her claims about Sterling Enterprises. "All done," Marcus announced, stepping back to admire his work. "You look absolutely gorgeous." Natasha smiled at her reflection. She did look good, confident, successful, and ready for whatever the evening might bring. Benjamin was expecting to see a broken woman grateful for his invitation. Instead, he was going to face someone he no longer recognized. Back at her apartment, Natasha laid out everything for the evening. The gown hung on her closet door like a battle uniform. The jewelry sparkled in its velvet case. The shoes waited by the door, ready to carry her into war. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat down to review the financial reports Patricia had prepared. The numbers were even more damaging than she had remembered. Richardson Group's dependence on Sterling-controlled contracts was complete. If she decided to pull those contracts, Benjamin's business would collapse within 6 months. The thought gave her a dark satisfaction. For 3 years, she had built her empire while Benjamin enjoyed his success, never knowing that his prosperity depended on the woman he had discarded. Tonight, that ignorance would end. Her phone rang. "Hello, Mother." "Natasha, honey, how are you feeling about tonight?" Eleanor Richardson. She had kept Benjamin's name after the divorce, mainly because changing it back would have been another hassle she didn't need, was the only person who knew the full truth about her daughter's transformation. She had watched Natasha rebuild her life from nothing and had been her biggest supporter during the darkest days. I'm ready, Natasha said. More than ready. Are you sure about this? You could just continue living your successful life without confronting Benjamin. Why put yourself through this? Natasha considered the question. It wasn't about money, she had more than enough of that. It wasn't even about revenge exactly. It was about justice. Benjamin had tried to destroy her spirit, to convince her that she was worthless without him. He had taken everything from her and left her with nothing but doubt and pain. Tonight was about proving to herself as much as to him, that she was stronger than he had ever imagined. It was about closing a chapter of her life that had been left open for too long. Because he needs to know, she said finally. He needs to understand what he threw away. And he needs to face the consequences of his choices. Just remember, baby, you've already won. You don't need his validation or his apology. You've built something amazing and you did it without him. I know, Mama. But I need to do this. After hanging up, Natasha went to her safe and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was her original wedding ring, the simple band Benjamin had given her when they were young and struggling to build their first business together. She had kept it not out of sentiment, but as a reminder of who she used to be. Tonight she would finally let go of that woman forever. At 6:30 she began getting dressed. Each piece of her outfit was a piece of armor, protecting her from the vulnerability she had felt the last time she saw Benjamin. The dress, the shoes, the jewelry, they all transformed her into someone new, someone powerful. At exactly 7 o'clock, her driver knocked on the door. Mrs. Richardson? Your car is ready. Natasha took one last look at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was confident, successful, and ready for anything. She bore little resemblance to the broken woman who had left the courthouse 3 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. Let's go, she said and walked out to face her past. The Henderson Grand Hotel ballroom was a vision of luxury and elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast sparkling light over the crowd of beautifully dressed guests, while servers circulated with champagne and gourmet appetizers. The annual charity gala was always one of the social events of the season, attracting the city's most influential business leaders and philanthropists. Natasha arrived fashionably late, exactly as she had planned. Her driver opened the door of the sleek black town car, and she stepped out onto the red carpet that led to the hotel entrance. She could feel the eyes of the photographers and other guests as she walked confidently toward the ballroom doors. Inside, the party was in full swing. She recognized many faces from the business pages of newspapers and magazines, CEOs, investors, politicians, and socialites, all mingling in their finest attire. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and began moving through the crowd, looking for familiar faces. Natasha? Natasha Richardson? She turned to see Thomas Williams approaching with a surprised smile. Thomas, how lovely to see you here. I had no idea you'd be attending tonight. You look absolutely stunning. Thank you. I wouldn't miss it. It's for such a good cause. As they chatted, Natasha noticed other Sterling-affiliated executives in the crowd. Robert Chin from the investment firm where she had gotten her start was deep in conversation with a group of bankers. Margaret Foster, CEO of one of Sterling's retail chains, was laughing with the mayor's wife near the auction display. Perfect. When the time came, she would have plenty of witnesses who could verify her claims. Natasha. The voice behind her was one she hadn't heard in 3 years, but it still sent a chill down her spine. She turned slowly to face Benjamin Richardson. He looked older than she remembered. His dark hair was now streaked with gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there during their marriage. He was still handsome in his expensive tuxedo, but there was something harder about his face now, something calculating. Standing beside him was Brittany, now Mrs. Benjamin Richardson. She was as beautiful as ever, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her slim figure enhanced by a designer gown that probably cost more than most people made in a month. She looked at Natasha with poorly concealed disdain. Benjamin, Natasha said calmly. Thank you for the invitation. I wasn't sure you'd come, he replied, his eyes taking in her appearance. She could see surprise in his face. She clearly looked better than he had expected. You look, well. Thank you. Life has been good to me. Brittany stepped closer to Benjamin's side, her hand sliding possessively through his arm. Natasha, isn't it? I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Brittany Richardson. The emphasis on the last name was deliberate and petty. Natasha smiled graciously. Congratulations on your marriage. I hope you're very happy together. Oh, we are, Brittany gushed, displaying her enormous diamond wedding ring. Benjamin has given me everything I ever dreamed of. We just got back from Paris, a belated honeymoon trip. We stayed in the most beautiful suite at the Four Seasons. Natasha nodded politely, though she already knew about the trip. She owned the hotel chain that had provided their accommodations, though they didn't know that. That sounds wonderful, she said. I've always loved Paris. Have you been recently? Benjamin asked, and there was something sharp in his tone. I imagine international travel isn't exactly in your budget these days. The comment was designed to sting, to remind her of her supposedly reduced circumstances. Natasha felt the old familiar pain try to surface, but she pushed it down. She had moved far beyond the reach of Benjamin's casual cruelties. I managed to get around, she said lightly. Well, it's good to see you're managing, Brittany said with false sweetness. It must be difficult starting over at your age. But I'm sure you'll find your way eventually. The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. To Brittany, Natasha was a cautionary tale, the discarded first wife who served as a reminder of what could happen if a woman didn't hold on to her man tightly enough. Actually, Natasha said, I've found starting over to be quite liberating. Sometimes losing everything gives you the freedom to become something better than you ever imagined possible. Benjamin's eyes narrowed slightly. Something in her tone seemed to puzzle him. What exactly are you doing these days, Natasha? For work, I mean. Consulting, she replied vaguely. Business development, investment advice, that sort of thing. Consulting, Brittany repeated with a small laugh. How nice. That must be interesting work. It has its rewards. I'm sure, Benjamin said. Though I imagine the client base is somewhat limited. The business world can be very exclusive, especially for people without the right connections. Again, the dig was deliberate. He was reminding her that their divorce had cut her off from the professional network they had built together. In his mind, she was now an outsider looking in, dependent on whatever scraps of work she could find among the lower tiers of the business world. You'd be surprised, Natasha said. I've found that talent and results matter more than connections. Good work speaks for itself. Does it? Benjamin's smile was cold. Well, I hope that philosophy works out for you. Though I have to say, the business world has become increasingly competitive since you left the field. It takes a certain kind of person to succeed at the highest levels. The implication was clear. She wasn't that kind of person. She never had been, and she never would be. Natasha felt a familiar rage building in her chest, but she kept her expression pleasant and calm. You're absolutely right, Benjamin. It does take a certain kind of person. The kind who doesn't give up when things get difficult. The kind who learns from failure and comes back stronger. Oh, how inspiring, Brittany said with another laugh. You should write self-help books. Before Natasha could respond, the lights dimmed and a voice came over the sound system asking everyone to take their seats for dinner. As the crowd began moving toward the dining area, Benjamin leaned closer to Natasha. I hope you enjoy the evening, he said quietly. I thought it might be educational for you to see how the other half lives. With that, he and Brittany walked away, leaving Natasha standing alone in the crowd. But instead of feeling hurt or diminished by the encounter, she felt energized. Everything was proceeding exactly as she had hoped. Benjamin and Brittany had revealed themselves completely in just a few minutes of conversation. Their arrogance, their cruelty, their absolute certainty of their own superiority, it was all on full display. They had no idea what was coming for them. Dinner was an elaborate affair with multiple courses and carefully paired wines. Natasha found herself seated at a table with several business leaders she recognized, including Margaret Foster and two other CEOs whose companies were part of the Sterling portfolio. Benjamin and Brittany were seated at the head table, where they could be seen by everyone in the room. As the evening progressed, Natasha observed them carefully. Benjamin was in his element, holding court with important guests, telling stories and making everyone laugh. He had always been charming in social situations, able to make people feel like they were the most important person in the room. Brittany basked in his reflected glory, hanging on his every word and making sure everyone noticed her expensive jewelry and designer gown. She was playing the part of the perfect trophy wife, beautiful and devoted to her successful husband. During the second course, Benjamin rose from his seat and approached the microphone at the front of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment. The room quieted as all eyes turned to him. He looked confident and at ease, clearly comfortable being the center of attention. First, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight and for your generous support of the Children's Education Foundation. Your donations will make a real difference in the lives of deserving young people. Polite applause filled the room. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge someone special who's here with us tonight, Benjamin continued, his eyes finding Natasha in the crowd. My ex-wife, Natasha Richardson, has joined us this evening. I thought it would be nice for her to see how successful our little business has become since our divorce." The room fell silent. This was clearly unexpected and inappropriate, but no one seemed to know how to respond. Natasha felt every eye in the room turn to her, and she could sense the discomfort of the other guests. "You see," Benjamin went on, "when Natasha and I divorced 3 years ago, she was convinced that she was essential to our company's success. She thought that without her creative input we would struggle. Well, I'm happy to report that Richardson Group has actually thrived since her departure. We've grown by 200%, expanded into new markets, and just this year we were named Marketing Firm of the Year by Business Excellence magazine." More uncomfortable silence. Even Brittany looked uncertain about where this was going. "So Natasha," Benjamin said, raising his wine glass in her direction, "I want to thank you. Your departure forced us to reach new heights. Sometimes losing dead weight is exactly what a business needs to soar." The insult was devastating in public, delivered in front of the most influential people in the city. Several guests looked appalled by Benjamin's cruelty, but others seemed entertained by the drama. Natasha could feel their stares, could imagine their whispered conversations later about the bitter divorced couple and their public confrontation. But instead of feeling humiliated, Natasha felt a calm settle over her. Benjamin had just made a fatal mistake. He had attacked her publicly, in front of witnesses, and claimed credit for success that actually belonged to her. He had given her the perfect opening for what was to come. She stood slowly, her movements graceful and controlled. The room watched as she picked up her own wine glass and smiled at Benjamin. "Thank you, Benjamin," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. "That's very kind of you to say. I'm so glad Richardson Group has done well. Success suits you." She paused, letting the moment build. "I'm especially glad to hear that you've grown by 200%. That's quite impressive for a company that I understand gets significant revenue from clients like Henderson Industries." Thomas Williams nodded from his nearby table. "That's correct. Henderson has been a major client of Richardson Group for the past 2 years. And Sterling Manufacturing," added Robert Chin. "They've done excellent work for us as well." "Sterling Real Estate Development too," called out Margaret Foster. Natasha smiled as more Sterling-affiliated executives confirmed their business relationships with Richardson Group. She could see confusion beginning to cloud Benjamin's face as he realized that all of his biggest clients seemed to know this woman he had just publicly humiliated. "It's interesting," Natasha continued, still holding her wine glass, "how interconnected the business world can be. You never know who might be behind the companies you work with. Sometimes the most successful people are the ones you never see coming." "What are you getting at?" Benjamin asked, his confidence wavering. "Oh, nothing specific," Natasha replied innocently. "I'm just observing how small the business world really is. How the same names keep appearing in different contexts. How success can be built on relationships you don't even realize you have." Brittany was looking back and forth between them, clearly sensing that something was happening but not understanding what it was. "I mean," Natasha went on, "take Sterling Enterprises for example. Very successful company from what I understand. Owns businesses across multiple industries. But nobody really knows who runs it. Very mysterious." She could see Benjamin's face changing as the name Sterling began to register. He was starting to make connections, starting to realize that he had heard that name more often than could be coincidental. "The interesting thing about anonymous ownership," Natasha said, her voice conversational but carrying to every corner of the room, "is that it allows you to observe how people really behave when they think no one important is watching. You get to see their true character." Benjamin set down his microphone with shaking hands. His face had gone pale, and Natasha could see the wheels turning in his mind as he began to put the pieces together. "But of course," she concluded, raising her wine glass high, "sometimes it's more fun to step out of the shadows and let people know exactly who they've been dealing with." The room was dead silent, every guest hanging on her words, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary but not yet understanding what it was. Benjamin's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "What are you saying?" Natasha's smile was radiant and terrible. "I'm saying, Benjamin, that you were right about one thing. Your departure from my life did allow me to reach new heights. Heights you can't even imagine." Benjamin remained frozen at the microphone, his face growing paler by the second as the implications of Natasha's words began to sink in. The entire ballroom was silent, guests exchanging confused glances as they tried to understand what was happening between the divorced couple. "Sterling Enterprises," Benjamin repeated slowly, his voice barely audible through the sound system. You're saying you know about Sterling Enterprises? Know about it? Natasha laughed, a sound that was both musical and menacing. Benjamin, I think you're still not quite understanding the situation. She began walking slowly toward the head table, her heels clicking against the marble floor in the hushed ballroom. Every step was measured and deliberate, like a predator approaching wounded prey. Let me help clarify things for you, she said as she moved. Thomas, would you mind telling everyone what percentage of Henderson Industries' marketing budget goes to Richardson Group? Thomas Williams, looking fascinated by the unfolding drama, consulted his phone. Approximately 60% of our annual marketing budget. Richardson Group handles our luxury hotel chains, our restaurant division, and our real estate development projects. And Robert, what about your investment firm? Robert Chin nodded. Richardson Group manages our client communications and brand development. They've been with us for 18 months now. Margaret. Sterling Real Estate Development has used Richardson Group for all our major campaigns for the past 2 years, Margaret confirmed. They handle everything from our residential projects to our commercial developments. Natasha reached the head table and stood directly across from Benjamin, who was now gripping the microphone stand for support. Are you starting to see the pattern, Benjamin? I don't understand what you're implying, he stammered, but his voice betrayed his growing fear. Henderson Industries, Sterling Manufacturing, Sterling Real Estate Development, Sterling Investment Management, Natasha recited. All major clients of Richardson Group. All very successful companies. All with one very interesting thing in common. She paused, letting the tension build as Benjamin's breathing became more rapid and shallow. They're all owned by the same parent company. Sterling Enterprises. The gasps from the audience were audible. Several guests had pulled out their phones and were clearly looking up information about Sterling Enterprises, their faces showing shock as they discovered the scope of the company's holdings. Brittany, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally found her voice. That's impossible. Richardson Group has dozens of major clients. You can't possibly be suggesting that's some mysterious company? Not mysterious at all, Natasha said calmly. Just private. Sterling Enterprises owns 47 companies across 12 industries. Those companies employ over 15,000 people and generate annual revenues of approximately $230 million. The numbers hit the room like physical blows. Several guests were now openly staring at Natasha with new recognition and respect. The woman they had watched Benjamin publicly humiliate moments earlier was apparently one of the most successful business owners in the city. That's not possible, Benjamin whispered. You're lying. After the divorce you had nothing. I know because I took everything. The house, the cars, the business, everything was mine. You took everything that was legally yours, Natasha agreed. Which, thanks to my naive trust in you, was indeed everything we had built together. You left me with $27 and a suitcase full of clothes. Her voice carried clearly through the room, and several guests looked appalled at this revelation of Benjamin's ruthlessness during their divorce. But you made one critical error, Benjamin. You assumed that what we built together was the limit of what I was capable of building. You thought that without you I would crumble and disappear. You never considered that losing everything might actually free me to become something much more powerful than I had ever been before. Benjamin was shaking his head in denial. Even if what you're saying is true, even if you somehow managed to build some kind of business empire, Richardson Group doesn't depend on any single client. We're diversified. We have contracts with dozens of companies. 43%? Natasha said simply. What? 43% of Richardson Group's revenue comes from companies owned by Sterling Enterprises. Would you like me to break that down for you? She pulled out her phone and began reading from the financial reports Patricia had prepared. Henderson Industries, $2.8 million annually. Sterling Manufacturing, $1.6 million. Sterling Real Estate, $2.2 million. Sterling Investment Management, $1.1 million. Sterling Technology Solutions, $800,000. Sterling Retail Group, $1.3 million. Should I continue? With each number, Benjamin seemed to shrink further into himself. The color had completely drained from his face, and he was now openly perspiring despite the air conditioning in the ballroom. He started, then stopped, apparently unable to form coherent thoughts. Nearly $4 million annually, Natasha finished for him. Without those contracts, Richardson Group would be operating at a significant loss. Your company would be bankrupt within 6 months. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Many of the guests were business leaders themselves, and they understood immediately what this meant. Benjamin Richardson, who had just publicly humiliated his ex-wife, had unknowingly built his success on her money. "This is insane," Brittany said, her voice shrill with panic. "You're making this up. There's no way you could own all those companies." "We would have known. Benjamin would have known." "Would he?" Natasha asked, turning her attention to the younger woman. "Tell me, Brittany, how much attention did Benjamin pay to the fine print of his contracts? Did he research the ownership structure of his clients? Or was he too busy enjoying the lifestyle those contracts provided to ask questions about where the money was really coming from?" Brittany looked to Benjamin for support, but he was staring at Natasha as if seeing a ghost. The confident, successful businessman who had stood at the microphone minutes earlier was gone, replaced by a man who was clearly struggling to process the magnitude of what he was learning. "You see," Natasha continued, "the beautiful thing about anonymous ownership is that it lets you see how people really behave when they think no one important is watching. For 2 years, I've been observing how you treat the people you think are beneath you. I've watched you take credit for work that was actually funded by my companies. I've seen how you talk about me to your friends and business associates." She moved closer to Benjamin, her voice dropping to a conversational level that still carried through the microphone. "I've seen who you really are, Benjamin. And I've been very disappointed." The host of the gala, Victoria Henderson, approached the microphone area with obvious nervousness. As the owner of Henderson Industries and the primary organizer of the charity event, she felt responsible for the growing tension in the ballroom. "Perhaps we should take a short break," she suggested diplomatically. "Allow everyone to process what we've heard." "Actually," Natasha said, turning to face the crowd, "I think this is the perfect time to address something important. You see, everyone here tonight believes they were invited by Benjamin and Brittany Richardson. But that's not entirely accurate." She gestured toward Victoria Henderson. "Victoria, would you mind telling everyone who actually funds this annual charity gala?" Victoria looked uncomfortable but answered honestly. "The primary sponsor has always been an anonymous donor who covers most of the event costs and matches all donations dollar for dollar. We've never met this donor personally. All arrangements are made through representatives." "And how long has this arrangement been in place?" 3 years now. The anonymous donor approached us shortly after the previous main sponsor withdrew their support." Natasha nodded. "Benjamin, do you remember when you volunteered to host this gala 3 years ago? When you told everyone you were taking over as the primary sponsor?" Benjamin's face was now a sickly gray color. You can't be the anonymous donor who has been funding this event for 3 years? The person whose money has allowed you to take credit for charitable giving while actually contributing very little of your own funds?" Natasha's smile was razor sharp. "Yes, Benjamin. That was me." The gasps from the audience were louder this time. Several guests were now openly staring at Benjamin with disgust as they realized he had been taking credit for someone else's generosity. "But it gets better," Natasha continued. "Victoria, would you please tell everyone how much the anonymous donor has contributed to the Children's Education Foundation over the past 3 years?" Victoria consulted her records on her phone. "The anonymous donor has contributed over $2 million in direct funding, plus matching donations. It's been the largest source of funding in the foundation's history." $2 million, Natasha repeated, letting the number sink in. "Benjamin, in those same 3 years, how much have you and Brittany personally contributed to the foundation?" Benjamin opened his mouth but no sound came out. Brittany stepped forward, her voice defensive. "We've contributed our time and effort organizing these events. That's worth something." "Of course it is," Natasha agreed pleasantly. "Though I should mention that the event planning for these galas has been handled by Sterling Event Management, another subsidiary of Sterling Enterprises. So technically, you've been taking credit for organizing events that were actually planned and executed by my employees." The room erupted in murmurs as guests began to fully grasp the scope of what they were witnessing. Benjamin Richardson, who had built his reputation on his business success and charitable work, had apparently been living off the achievements of the woman he had publicly scorned. "This is impossible," Benjamin said desperately. "Even if everything you're saying is true, how could you have kept it secret? How could I not have known?" "Because you never bothered to look," Natasha replied simply. "You were so convinced of your own superiority, so certain that I was irrelevant to your success, that you never questioned where your good fortune was really coming from. You saw what you wanted to see." She turned to address the entire room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to apologize for this public display. I know this isn't what you expected when you came here tonight to support a worthy cause. But sometimes the truth has a way of demanding to be heard. Margaret Foster stood up at her table. Are you really saying that you've been secretly supporting Benjamin's business for 3 years? While he's been publicly dismissing you. That's exactly what I'm saying. I've been paying for his lifestyle, funding his reputation, and enabling his success, all while he told anyone who would listen that I was worthless without him. Thomas Williams shook his head in amazement. That's incredible. You've been playing a 3-year game while he didn't even know there was a board. But why? Asked Robert Chin. Why would you support someone who treated you so badly? Natasha considered the question. At first it wasn't intentional. When I started acquiring companies, I focused on businesses with good fundamentals and growth potential. It was only after I had purchased several of Benjamin's clients that I realized the connection. And once I understood what was happening, I decided to see how far it would go. She looked directly at Benjamin, who was still standing frozen at the microphone. I wanted to see if success would humble you. I hoped that maybe, given enough time and prosperity, you might develop some perspective about what you had done to me. I thought you might eventually realize that your good fortune was too convenient to be entirely your own doing. And did it? Someone called out from the audience. Natasha's laugh was bitter. Quite the opposite. The more successful Richardson Group became, the more credit Benjamin took. The more money flowed in, the more convinced he became of his own genius. And the more secure he felt, the crueler he became in his references to me. She gestured toward the microphone where Benjamin still stood. Tonight was supposed to be the culmination of that cruelty. He invited me here specifically to humiliate me, to show me how much better his life was without me. He wanted to rub my face in his success and make sure I understood my place in his world. Benjamin finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. Natasha, if what you're saying is true then? Then what, Benjamin? Then you're sorry? Then you want to make amends? Then you realize you made a mistake? She stepped closer to him, her voice dropping to a whisper that the microphone still picked up. It's too late for apologies, Benjamin. You had 3 years to show me who you really were, and you showed me someone I don't recognize. Someone cruel and petty and arrogant. Someone who takes credit for other people's work and generosity while treating them like garbage. The room was completely silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the city outside. So here's what's going to happen, Natasha said, her voice returning to normal volume. Effective Monday morning, Sterling Enterprises will be terminating all contracts with Richardson Group. All of them. Henderson Industries, Sterling Manufacturing, Sterling Real Estate Development, every single subsidiary will be finding new marketing partners. Benjamin's legs seemed to give out, and he had to grab the podium to keep from falling. You can't, that would destroy everything we've built. Everything you've built? Natasha's voice was sharp with anger. You built nothing, Benjamin. You were a middleman taking credit for my success. The only thing you built was your own ego. She turned to face the audience one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your patience during this unexpected revelation. I hope you'll continue to support the Children's Education Foundation, which does genuinely important work. And I hope you'll remember that sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones you never see coming. With that, she walked away from the head table, leaving Benjamin collapsed against the podium and Brittany staring after her in shock. The game was over and Natasha had won. 3 months after the gala, Natasha sat in her office reading the morning business news on her tablet. The lead story in the Business Journal was about the bankruptcy filing of Richardson Group. The article detailed how the marketing firm had lost several major clients simultaneously and been unable to recover financially. Benjamin's quotes in the article were pathetic. He claimed the business failures were due to unforeseeable market changes and unfortunate contract cancellations beyond our control. There was no mention of his ex-wife or the dramatic revelation at the charity gala, though anyone in the business community who had been there would understand exactly what had happened. Patricia knocked on the door and entered with the morning mail. The final reports from all the terminated Richardson contracts are on your desk, she said. Every subsidiary has successfully transitioned to new marketing partners. Several of them are reporting better results than they ever achieved with Richardson Group. Excellent, Natasha replied, setting down the tablet. What about the charity foundation? Donations are actually up from last year. It seems the publicity from the gala, despite the drama, actually increased awareness of their work. Victoria Henderson asked me to pass along her thanks for your continued support. Good. What else? You have 3 acquisition proposals to review, a conference call with the Sterling Technology Board at 2, and the final fitting for your dress for tomorrow night's Medical Research Foundation Gala. Natasha smiled. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm attending more charity events now than I ever did when I was married to Benjamin. You also have several interview requests from business magazines. Forbes wants to do a cover story on Sterling Enterprises now that you've decided to be more public about your ownership. I think it's time, Natasha said. The anonymous approach served its purpose, but now I want other young entrepreneurs to see that it's possible to rebuild after losing everything. Set up the Forbes interview for next week. After Patricia left, Natasha returned to her morning reading. Buried on page 3 of the business section was a small item about Benjamin and Brittany's divorce proceedings. Apparently, the financial stress of Richardson Group's collapse had been too much for their marriage. Brittany had filed papers citing irreconcilable differences, though sources close to the couple suggested she had left after discovering the full extent of their debt. The article mentioned that Brittany was reportedly dating a real estate developer she had met at a country club charity function. The developer was described as significantly older but financially stable. Natasha felt no satisfaction in learning about Benjamin's personal troubles. If anything, she felt sorry for him. He had lost everything because he couldn't see past his own ego to understand what he was really dealing with. His downfall wasn't the result of her vindictiveness, it was the inevitable consequence of building a house of cards on someone else's foundation. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her mother. Saw the Business Journal article. How are you feeling today? Natasha typed back, free. Finally, completely free. And it was true. For 3 years, she had carried the weight of Benjamin's betrayal and the need to prove him wrong about her worth. The confrontation at the gala had lifted that burden from her shoulders. She no longer needed his validation or acknowledgement. She had proven to herself that she was stronger and more capable than he could ever imagine. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in. To her surprise, Thomas Williams entered, looking somewhat nervous. Natasha, I hope you don't mind me stopping by without an appointment. I wanted to speak with you about something personal. Of course, Thomas. Please sit down. He settled into the chair across from her desk and cleared his throat. I've been thinking about what happened at the gala, about everything you revealed that night. I wanted you to know that I think what you did was remarkable. Thank you, but I'm not sure it was remarkable. It was just necessary. No, I disagree. You could have destroyed Benjamin quietly behind the scenes without anyone knowing it was you. Instead, you forced him to confront the truth about himself publicly. You made him face the consequences of his actions in front of everyone he had tried to impress. Thomas leaned forward in his chair. More importantly, you showed everyone in that room that they had been underestimating you. You changed how every person there thinks about power and success and the assumptions we make about people. Natasha considered his words. I hope some good comes from it. I hope other people who have been dismissed or underestimated might find some inspiration in seeing that it's possible to rebuild and thrive. They will, Thomas assured her. In fact, that's part of why I'm here. My daughter just graduated from business school, and she's struggling to find her footing in the corporate world. She's brilliant, but she's facing the same kind of dismissive attitudes you faced with Benjamin. Would you consider mentoring her? The request surprised Natasha, but it also pleased her. I'd be honored to meet with her. Thank you. I think you could teach her things about resilience and strategy that she'll never learn in any classroom. After Thomas left, Natasha walked to her window and looked out over the city. From her office, she could see the building where Richardson Group used to be located. The space was now occupied by a tech startup, one of the companies she had helped finance through Sterling Enterprises. She thought about the woman she had been 3 years ago, sitting in that cheap motel room with $27 and a broken heart. That woman would never have imagined the view from this office or the empire she would build. But that woman had also possessed something Benjamin never recognized: an unbreakable spirit and the determination to rise from any fall. The intercom buzzed. Ma'am, you have a visitor. She says her name is Eleanor Richardson and that she's your mother. Natasha smiled. Send her up, Patricia. A few minutes later, her mother entered the office, looking around in amazement at the luxurious space. Baby, this is incredible. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. Thank you, Mama. I couldn't have done it without your support during those dark days. Eleanor hugged her daughter tightly. I brought you something, she said, pulling a small wrapped package from her purse. I've been saving it for the right moment. Natasha opened the package to find a simple picture frame containing a photo from her college graduation. In the picture, she was young and hopeful, surrounded by family ready to take on the world. I want you to remember her, Eleanor said softly. That young woman who believed she could do anything. She was right. Natasha placed the frame on her desk where she could see it every day. You know what the best part is, Mama? I'm not done yet. This is just the beginning. As the afternoon sun streamed through her office windows, Natasha Richardson, founder and CEO of Sterling Enterprises, anonymous philanthropist, and one of the most successful business leaders in the city, began planning her next acquisition. Benjamin had been wrong about almost everything, but he had been right about one thing. Losing dead weight was exactly what she needed to soar. She had just never imagined that he would be the dead weight she needed to lose.